Today's Torah portion is normally a double portion called Achrei Mot Kedoshim. Because we're on the triennial cycle, today in Shul, we'll be reading only the section that is from Kedoshim, and we'll be reading from Leviticus 19, verse 15 through 20. The whole section is from 16 through 20. And the part that we're going to do has a name that you probably know, and that is it's called the Holiness Code. And so before I pass out the worksheet, I thought we would spend just a few minutes discussing in general what we think the word holy means. Because one of the reasons we're going to do that is to look at how it's used here. So I wanted you to think about when you think of the word holy, and you think of blessings and you think of things like that, there are blessings we say every week that have the word holy in them, and we could think of which blessings you use.
Every blessing was.
Right, so and what's the section? It's Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav. Who made us holy with his commandments. We say that as the beginning of every single blessing. And the question there is, when you say that, what kind of holiness is there? How do we think of the word holy there?
It's separating us.
And there it's separating us.
Elevation.
Elevation is another thing for it.
I think also, it would be more like God-centered. Than something to be holy.
Yes, it's connected to God. And one of the things that I found is there are 3 different uses of holiness in connection with various commandments. So there's in Exodus, there's you shall be a holy people to me. And then the commandment is you must not eat flesh torn from the beasts of the field. So there it's in a connection with abstaining from something. Then there's in Leviticus in the section they shall not shave smooth any part of their heads or cut the side growths or their beards or make fat gashes in their flesh. They shall be holy to their God. So that's not doing things that defile the body. Is one of the commandments for Jews to be holy. Other groups felt that they did things that we would consider hurting the body to show that they were holy, and Judaism said, no, you don't do things like that to make yourselves holy because that's defiling your body. And then there's in terms of how you live and how to be sanitary. In Deuteronomy, there's also a section which says you should cover up the excrement that's in you so that your camp may be holy. So again, the feeling that in order to be holy, you need to be sanitary. So there are all these different ways of thinking of holy, but in the holiness code, there's a different way of thinking of it. It says, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. So what's the difference between that and these previous examples?
It's a positive, no, don't do that, don't do this. It's some.
Yes, it's a positive. And it's really a very high kind of thing that you're trying to reach for. You should be holy because God is holy. So and one of the questions always is, can people ever be as holy as God? Is that something that you can reach for or not?
Isn't that God is holy? Isn't that almost redundant? Or are we distinguished with the devil? What is God is holy?
He's separate from the other gods that we don't believe in.
Okay.
Yeah, and one of the things, and I'm going to pass out what we're going to look at on both sides. So those of you who've done a study with me before know that I've been interested in some of the more recent commentaries. And I always like to look at what Robert Alter has to say and what Everett Fox has to say. And one of the things I think that Robert Alter particularly mentions is that holiness or in the holiness code is a continuation of this idea that the Jews should be separate from other people and should try to, and that their God is separate from other gods. So that is absolutely one of the things that's there. We make sure all the extras are up at the corners if somebody walks in. Right there. So I thought that that's what we should think about to start, is that this idea of being holy is a very lofty concept. And Alter specifically looks at the very first two verses of this, verse 2 and verse 3 in chapter 19. And I thought we should start with those. And I wanted to look at them at the Hebrew and then look at what he says about them. So the first ones are Daber el kol edat b'nei Yisrael ve'amarta alehem kadoshim tihiyu ki kadosh Adonai ani Adonai Elohechem ish imo ve'aviv tira'u ve'et shaktotai tishmoru ani Adonai Elohechem. So before we look at what he has to say about them, what's the reasoning here?
Reasoning for what?
The reasoning for following commandments, for following the holiness code.
Oh, because God is holy, we want to emulate him.
Oh, God doesn't say he's holy, he does, in the first one he says, He kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem.
And that's the reason we should also revere our father and mother and keep the Sabbaths.
Right, so it's not because you're gonna live a longer life, you're gonna be healthier, you're gonna feel better. It's because God is holy and you should do it.
Well, that's how, I'm not clear on the chronology, but haven't we already someone has entered into some level of covenantal relationship with God? And so there is a little bit of, we'll be this way if you'll be that way. You'll protect us if we are acting this way. And so, although it might not be a direct monetary benefit or specifically lengthening of life, we get a sense that we're in a relationship with God, and being holy now is some of the things he's telling us that, or God is telling us that we need to fulfill to continue with that covenant.
Absolutely, but one of the things you want to think of is this is the book of Leviticus. So this, many of the things that are in the holiness code have already been stated in different ways, especially in Exodus. And if you look at the book of Leviticus, is from the word law. And so it's a restatement in many ways of laws that we've already heard before. And there's not a lot of events in the book of Leviticus. There's a lot of rule stating. And one of the questions is why these rules are restated. And this section known as the Holiness Code really has two parts to it. It has ethical behavior and it has personal, intimate sexual behavior. And restates what Jews should do and should not do. Sheila?
Well, what he's basically saying is, you do this because I'm telling you to, and I'm holy. Much like any of the gods or not, the gods of other people, because he's not offering other reasons. I mean, to say that you live a long life, he doesn't go into explaining how. It's not like the articles today that tell you eat this because that, or do that because you will feel better. You're not doing it because you're going to feel better. You're going to do it because you want to emulate me and because I'm saying so.
Yes, and one of the things we're going to look at is what kinds of things are considered in the ethical part of this and what kinds of things are mentioned in the intimate sexual part of this. And what's interesting, if we're looking at 19 and 20, chapter 18 is all about sexual behavior, what's permissible and what is not. Chapter 19 is all about ethical behavior, and then chapter 20 again returns to sexual behavior and intimate behavior. And when I was looking at this, to think about how to teach it, one of the things that was brought up in some material from Gunther Plaut, the Reform rabbi who did the big Reform commentary, is that the Jewish attitude toward intimate behavior is that one should have control, not that one should have abstain. And therefore, all the things where you should exercise self-control and not do these things, it's not that are in the areas of intimate behavior, but the things that are in the area of ethical behavior are things that make the whole society better. The things that are in the area of intimate behavior are about how you personally behave, and that you have the self-control not to engage in certain kinds of acts that are not good for society.
What you just made me think of, what we just said, you do it because God is holy. And it may not be PC, but the very Orthodox rabbis, the Haredi, the real ones, you do what they tell you to do, and you don't question them. Now, they can question, each rabbi will question each other, but the congregation is supposed to follow what they say. They tell you when Shabbat begins, they tell you what you wear, what you do.
So, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but many people, and not just Haredi, who are religious, one of the things that is said to them, you need to find a posek. You need to find someone who you're going to consult, and you can't run around trying this one, that one, and another one to get the answer you want. And I remember, I have a nephew who many years ago became a Baal Tshuva, and my sister said to him, decide who's going to be your decider, because you can't, otherwise,
Right.
you know, you can't make a decision about things. The same way if you're a conservative Jew or a Reformed Jew, it doesn't matter what kind of a Jew you are. If you're going to have somebody you consult, it's like the person who goes to the doctor and doesn't like the result and goes for a second opinion. And then they go for third opinion until they're gonna find the opinion they want. Well, this is the same thing in terms of religious advice. That if you believe that there is a rule and that you either like the rule or you don't like the rule and you want to know, can you bend the rule? You have to decide who is your posek, who is going to be the person who's going to be your decisor. And in many cases, for certain people, that means that they move out of a certain stream of Judaism, or they leave the synagogue they're in because they don't like the way the person who's in charge there of making those rules looks at them. Nina. Nelson online. Thank you. Nelson, you go ahead, please.
Thank you. I think of holiness as aspirational. We're never going to be holy, but we have to keep pushing towards it. God doesn't have to worry about that because he's there. And as for the question of the decider, you know, it isn't that somehow you have to do what God says because God said it. You have to do what, you don't have to do what God said. You do what God said because it's right. And if you don't know, it's not that you don't know what's right. If you can't figure out a way of finding what's right, you can ask for advice. And the Haredi think that their rabbis know more than they do. And that's why they go to them for advice. If you're an expert in something, people might come to you for advice, or you might give advice. But it isn't that they say it that makes it true. It's why they say it. And you can ask them. If they're really an expert, they can tell you why this is right. And if they say it because I say so, they're wrong.
Thank you. I think one of the things we're doing here, we're looking at what different commentators say about what we're reading to try to understand it more. So I want to go back to what Alter has to do here. And in verse 2, you can see that he is talking about the fact that the idea is for the people of Israel to make themselves holy by emulating God's intrinsic holiness. And it's a supreme rationale for how we are to try to live. And many scholars are trying to understand it in this section. And he also points out that it doesn't say every time Ani Adonai, the Ki Kadosh Ani Adonai Elohechem. In many places, it's just says Ani Adonai, I am your God. And the implication is your God who is holy, as we're going to read this section. Now, the verse 3 is a part of a section that has been noticed by many people, and if you want to look, you can look at the verses after it. That it's a restating in a different order of the Ten Commandments. So, on altered notes here, why doesn't somebody read this out for everybody? That's the commentary on verse 3.
I'll read it. Every man shall revere his mother and his father, and my Sabbath you shall keep. It has been recognized since late antiquity that this section of laws, beginning with this verse, constitutes a kind of paraphrase and elaboration of the Ten Commandments, following a different order, using somewhat different turns of phrase, and introducing additional legal imperatives. Abraham ibn Ezra, as usual with an eye to compositional links, notes the previous section was focused on prohibited sexual relations that could lead to the expulsion of people from its land. The variegated laws of the present chapter, he contends, came to remind Israel that there is a whole spectrum of commands which must be observed if it is to remain rooted in its land.
So it's interesting here, if you look at this one, if you know the order of the Ten Commandments, the one to observe the Sabbath is before the one to honor your parents. And in this paraphrase, the one to honor your parents is before observing the Sabbath. And I don't know if it struck you that way. And if you look at the those who know the Ten Commandments, it's ish imo v'aviv tira'u. And in the you shall fear, and in the Ten Commandments it says kabed et avicha ve'imecha. You should honor.
The aim.
You should honor your mother and your father. And here is
The aim is first. The mother is first.
And right, also the mother is first in this one, and in the other one, the father is first. And in the Exodus, the verb is honor. And here the verb is fear, but it's fear in the sense of awe, not fear in the sense of fright. So it's interesting. It's that it's reversed. And then the part about the Sabbath is after that, and it's all the Sabbaths et Shabtotai tishmoru, all my Sabbaths you shall observe. It's in the plural, and in the Ten Commandments in Exodus, it's in the singular. So
I guess for the sake of variety, would cover all bases.
well, so the first part of reversing the mother and the father.
It's like,
And I think it is important, that I think is very important, because it's saying, each parent is worthy of respect. It's not your father is more worthy of respect than your mother. Both parents are worthy of respect. And respect is not just you would honor, like getting up when they come in the room. It's also the awe or the fear that, your respect for your parents also they can rebuke you. And they may rebuke in a very unpleasant way, but that's part of it. But then the question is, the plural on the Shabtotai, on the Sabbath, it's like, in some Sabbaths it may be very inconvenient to observe the Sabbath. And the word used here is tishmoru, which is to guard, from the word shomer, who's a guard. You should.
it can also mean to keep.
Yes, but guard also means to keep, but it's interesting in the in Exodus, I don't think it's the same verb, is it? Look for me.
Is there any chance that in that time, the Sabbaths would have all included like certain festivals as well?
No, I think I don't,
Specific,
this is specifically, the Shabbat. So I think it's interesting to look at that, and I always like that, I happen to like Abraham ibn Ezra, and whenever anybody puts him in, I usually love to look, because he's a Spanish commentator from the 14th and 15th century, and he's very practical in what he has to say. And in this one, to notice the difference in the composition of it, that the sexual improprieties could lead you to be expelled from your land, but the ethical ones you need in order to be rooted in your country and to have a decent society, you need these ethical pieces. So if did somebody check,
It's interesting that it says my Shabbat, chapter 5,
yes,
which it doesn't say that in the first one.
so remind me did you find the first one?
Shabbat, it doesn't say chapter 5,
Right, it's in the singular,
but it also doesn't say my.
mine, so so these
Well,
are,
it's a paraphrase, it's not what God said, the 10 Commandments are 10 laws that are sort of abbreviated,
Sarah Deep wrote there the 10 utterances,
right?
so supposedly they were said.
And these are the sort of an explanation
This is gonna be an explanation, it's a
it's
restatement.
it's a less formal thing.
And it's interesting in the order, it starts with something that the honoring your parents is the beginning of ethics in society is first in your home. And then you're gonna reach out to what's gonna come next.
But it's still God, it's our Shabbat, it's not God's Shabbat. I mean,
Yes.
that part I don't get.
Well, it's the idea of resting and having a time of rest is because God, when he created the world, rested on the seventh day. So that's where this idea comes from. All the other people don't have this, and the idea that this again is because you are holy because God is holy. So if God has a Sabbath, so you'll have a Sabbath.
I'm gonna go off the.
went off dirt years ago.
Thank you. You're welcome. Anyway, so the 10 Commandments were given to us by God. Leviticus, we don't really know where it comes from, but I'm gonna say that the people were playing telephone, which explains mother before father, or, right? Singular versus plural, the order of the commandments, it can explain all of it.
That's a possibility. The question is, who is the compiler? Where they heard it from? Again, don't forget, we're talking about a time of oral law and oral communication, that's the era of the great oral poetry in other peoples. This people is putting down in a format that can be remembered into the future, all the things that are part of who they are. Whether they were all, and how you understand how it was compiled in writing, I'm not even gonna get into the theology. We'll look at it
I went
someplace
off
else.
the deal.
Right, but
Derek is right in that way.
but the idea that here's a restatement in a different way, and in some ways, a friendlier, easier, more accessible way, maybe to somebody, rather than seeing them as the big list. Okay, so these are the ones that okay, so here's the other thing, in Exodus, it says Zachor, remember. Well, and here it says Shmor, to observe or guard, and it says Zachor, here it's Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekodecho. Remember the Sabbath day to make it holy, and then it goes on 6 days shall you work, etc., etc. While here, it's in the plural, and it starts with et shabtotai tishmoru. So instead of starting with the verb remember, it says, and my Sabbaths you shall guard, you shall observe. And guarding it means you have a responsibility to take care of this day. which is very different from remembering this day and making it holy.
You had mentioned that you found these friendlier in some ways in the listing, and I actually take it very differently because they're all punctuated at the end with, and I am your God, and I am your God, and I am your God, with a continuous reminder versus this list, which maybe only up at the top of today. I'm the only one, and here are things I want you to do.
Okay, so that's a very good point. So you can look at it both ways. The wording of what you should do is friendlier, but the reason is right there each time. So you can take it either way. Go ahead.
What I was gonna say is on the Shabbat, the remember in the 10 Commandments. Excuse me, 10 utterances, 10 sayings. It is, they were in the desert at that time. They weren't working at all anyway.
Right.
So, but when it's repeated in Deuteronomy, they're gonna go into the land and they need to they need to do it, not just remember it at that
Right, but
point.
here in Leviticus, it's.
Well, this is Leviticus, but
It's Leviticus
yeah,
this is so in
The Torah is
Deuteronomy,
in order.
it's reset.
it's not chronological.
Right, but
It's
here it's in a
about going-
different order. So I'm gonna keep moving on, because I wanna get into a little bit more of this. So the other person who I always like is Edward Fox. And as I think I mentioned in the past, I know him and I know his wife, and when he was working on putting this together, he used to come to the Cage Conference and try out his translations on people to see how they felt. And I once was at their house and it was books everywhere, and he's always working on stuff. And some of you may know his wife, Sherry Kohler Fox, is originally from Akron. So, and you know, and he's been in the Boston area for a very long time. So his commentary on the Torah is now available online if you want to look at it, if you don't want to buy the big heavy book in Safari. So I excerpt what he had to say about chapter 19 and about chapter 20 for you. And he notices again that it's not systematic, that it's very wide ranging. And he thought that it's on purpose that it's not systematic. Because he feels that that the person who put this part together didn't want you to categorize everything. It's like, there are lots of things to be a moral society. And you can't say because I put this one first and this one second, it's more important. So he sees it, and he mentions several other modern commentators who think the random order is on purpose. It's a very nice way to get around the fact you can't categorize it, but I thought that was very
But
great.
but we know pretty much that they are different authors.
Yes, but I'm not even gonna get into that. I mean,
Yeah.
his point is whoever put it together, whether they're different authors or not. He thinks the fact that you can't categorize the order here is a good thing. It's not something that you
It's a
should.
good thing, but I don't think it's good.
So he's justifying it as a way to say that everything is equally important. And then on the offenses to God, he looks at them and notices that all that which are capital offenses and which are not. And he particularly notices that besides the sexual things, anything that has to do with ghosts, necromancy, worshiping the dead, all these kinds of things, you know, the seances, all that is completely off the books, and you can tell that it was still wandering around in their time. And when you think in our own time in the 19th century here,
So it is.
well, we're in the 21st century, but in the 19th century, in the Victorian era, it was very popular, and in the United States, in the beginning of the 20th century, seances and all that kind of thing. And we still have people who go into numerology and look and read the horoscopes, which are from Babylonia. So there's a pull always into this kind of alternative way of explaining whatever you can't explain. And it's right in here, no ghosts, no doing any of this stuff. And they mentioned Malach, who was one of the gods of the I think it's the Babylonians or the Assyrians who wanted child sacrifice. And specifically, don't follow that. So you can know that that must have been a very strong alternative way of looking at life that was still affecting people. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been specifically been one that was forbidden in Leviticus in this part. So I thought that that was very good.
Well, you had in America, I think it was the Aztecs or the Mayan, someone in Mexico where they had, they would cut off the finger of, at some point for some,
There
something
there
that they
are
were
many
doing
forms,
wrong.
many forms of self-mutilation.
But
in many-
but this is 500 CE.
Right,
This
but
is happening.
there's many forms of self-mutilation, just look
Cutting
at
off the
people,
arm.
just look at
Yeah.
the way people decorate themselves today. That I think from a Jewish point of view are
Tattoos.
considered a form of self-mutilation.
Earrings, you
I'm not talking about earrings. But
Tattoos,
earrings, tattoos, there's a lot of things that,
yeah, earrings in the wrong
Piercing.
place.
yeah,
Here's the
and
word.
the question is, we know that in biblical times that the, earrings in places that now today are only seen in Asian countries were also very common in the Middle East as well, and they apparently weren't considered forms of mutilation. But things, especially around men, of shaving parts of their heads, shaving their beards in strange ways, and mourning customs where people cut themselves and things like that, as forms of mourning. That things like that must have been quite prevalent if they're forbidden here. So, and different kinds of communities would consider different things self-mutilation. Now, I want to look at particularly at, there's themes in Kedoshim, and I picked a couple of them to look at, and there's two in particular. The first one is from Lo tikach v'lo titol et b'nei amecha ve'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, which I think many of you probably know. It's called the Golden Rule. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So there's a lot of questions around it. There's many midrashim around it. There's the famous one about Hillel and Shammai and the convert.
Yeah.
So does anybody here know it?
Yeah.
So you want to tell it to everybody if you can remember it?
What?
The hill on the Shammai.
The Hillel and Shammai,
Foot and go away.
the
Standing on
convert
one
comes
foot,
to
yeah.
Shammai and asks what he can learn about Judaism standing on one foot, and Shammai says it's absolutely not possible. And he comes to Hillel, and Hillel says, oh, standing on one foot, do not do to your neighbor that which you do not want done to you, which is the negative version of the Ahavta l're'echa kamocha.
Was he still on his foot when he says the rest is commentary and study?
Yeah, the rest is commentary. I always think of that when I practice my yoga. You can't stand on one foot. You know? How long did the convert have to stand on one foot? So, why do you think that is, in many things, that's, for many people, that's the most common commandment in the Bible that they know?
And it's
Because it's
also,
repeated.
and it's also common in many other religions too.
It's been picked up and it's
You
called,
know,
like Christianity calls it the
universal.
Golden Rule.
Yeah, universal.
And because we say it almost in the negative,
Well,
really bad people.
Right, but it's interesting, but in the Bible, it's in the positive, but the reason for it is beforehand in the Bible. Lo tikom v'lo titor et b'nei amecha, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge.
It must be for the same reasons you were commenting on ghost practice and other practices. It must be very prevalent among humans to do this act.
It
And
is.
so it needs reinforcement continuously to move
Right,
us off that way.
but the reason you shall, you should not bear a grudge. And you shall not take vengeance. And it's against your own people, it says, it doesn't say against your enemies, against your neighbors or things
Right.
like that, it says
Right.
against your own people. V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, you should love your neighbor as yourself, which, what does it mean about yourself?
You have to love yourself, and some people don't love themselves.
Yes, you have to love yourself.
And that's
If you
where
don't like
self-mutilation comes in.
Nina,
You know, it's interesting, the word love. It just glares at me, rather than respect, or revere, or get along, you know, whatever. Look at the commandment, respect your parents, right? Is
right,
that
respect your
how it's
parents and
translated?
fear your parents.
Okay. That's always bothered me, you know, that we're not commanded to love parents, but yet we're commanded to love our neighbor,
As yourself.
you know?
As
you would love yourself. Right,
So that means you have to love yourself before you can love or respect or fear or do anything nice to your neighbors. If you don't love yourself, how can you act properly toward anyone else?
yes, I mean, but still, okay, it's, I forgot what that's called, structure wise, like. No, not reflective, but love your fellow, it's not, it's conditional, that's what.
Yes, it's conditional,
Conditional that first you love yourself,
yes.
but but God does not say that, in terms of your parents or your children.
Right, so
So that's interesting to love someone you're somewhat connected to, maybe across the fence or something. You know, it's
it is very interesting that the place you're commanded to love is your neighbors.
right.
Not the members of your family, not your spouse, not your children. You're supposed to treat them with respect, reverence, if necessary with fear. Because anything that, your immediate family, you can't be commanded to love them, you're with you all the time. But
Oeja is not, neighbors necessarily.
well, we now use it,
I know,
it
but
has
that's
modern
not-
connotations.
But it's not neighbors.
Well, fellow, I guess it means your fellow
Friends.
Jews,
So
your community.
So it could be family members also,
Right, so as many people say it's love your fellow as yourself.
right?
As the way you see here, and here it says, love your fellow Israelite as yourself. So love your neighbor as yourself is I think is the Christian way that it's been translated a great deal.
Love the people that you deal with, is really what he's saying.
Possibly, so one of the questions here is, when you look at it, does it apply to feelings or to actions? Or both?
This is.
It doesn't specify.
Hmm?
It doesn't say,
So what do you think it means? I mean,
both. It should mean
Well-
both.
You know, we're part of Judaism is chesed, and we take care of each other and we can feel compassion for our fellow Jew. So to me, it's more actions. And to make a just and moral society, be able to get along and feel empathy for our fellow, you know, for our Jewish community. I mean,
So
that's a very-
I don't know, that's why, you know, it's an interesting thing about, is this in your actions or in your feelings or not? And one of the questions here, is this meaning just your fellow Jews? Because here in parentheses, it has Israelite, or does it mean all the fellow human beings that are in your community?
Well, it says in your last paragraph here, it says
members.
the strangers, in other words, there are those who are your community, the Israelites, and then it says the strangers.
Right,
We do separate them.
so there's no answer here. This is, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm thinking of ways like specifically that perhaps when this was written later, but may come from somewhere else. Because when they were going into Israel, okay, they couldn't love all the tribes, otherwise they wouldn't have a land. So I'm thinking this is possibly originally from Exodus, somewhere saying as a unity. Because perhaps they didn't have the opportunity when they were in Egypt, form relationships or things, so become a community. This is a community building structure Because if they didn't respect or love each other as Israelites, they wouldn't be able to go into battle to take over. If all of a sudden you go in and you have the Canaanites and everybody else, you're not gonna have a land because they're trying to drive you out, everything else. To me, this is almost getting what he's saying, you have to build a community within yourself, you have to love the Israelite. You have to love everybody else because they're out to attack you.
That's a possibility also. That's what is so beautiful about these ethical sayings here is there's many ways to interpret them, and I don't think any of them are wrong. That's one of the reasons there's so much commentary on the Holiness Code, because every single one of these has a great deal to it. So I want to look at the there's 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5 verses that I think are that are 32 to 36. So if someone wants to read out the Hebrew and somebody else the English, then I will talk about those. They're ethics of respect and fairness. Do you want to read out the Hebrew for us? Judy, do you want to do that? Yes.
No, I don't know where it is there.
Bottom of 2.
You shall rise, that one?
Right.
Yeah, except she wants the Hebrew.
The Hebrew, no.
You know, okay, so I'll do the Hebrew then. Mipnei seva takum v'hadarta an pnei zaken v'yarata me'elohecha ani Adonai. Ki yagur itcha ger ba'artzachem v'lo tanu ito. Ki ezrach mikem yihye lechem hager itchem v'ahavta lo kamocha. Ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim ani Adonai Elohechem. Lo ta'aseh evel b'mishpat b'midah u'b'mishkal u'b'mishura. Mi'oznei tzedek, avnei tzedek, ephod tzedek, v'chein tzedek yeh lechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeti echem me'eretz Mitzrayim. So
It's what Bill said earlier, each one of those has an ear and I.
right, and you look at these, the first one, mipnei seva takum. You should get up before the elderly. That's on all the buses in Israel, to give a seat to the elderly. Mipnei seva takum. And the reason for that is because God says you should, and show deference to the aged. And then the next one is all because you were a stranger. So the people who live among you, this would be Gerim, which would in our world we would call aliens today, illegals, people who are not part of, you shall not wrong them because you were once not a citizen where you lived before this. And again, it's you shall love them as yourself. They have a have to is in this one. And then the part about measures, which is very important. You shall have straight weights and measures. You're not supposed to put your finger on the scale when you weigh something. There's all kinds of a huge amount of Talmudic commentaries. This is all the stuff that makes for these are all the business laws in Judaism come from this section here, that you should not and it gives you the various things. An honest balance, because people you used a balance to do things, honest weights, that they should be the same, the correct weights. And I don't know what a and a hin are, but I think that's a ruler, like we would say, are you using pounds or are you using grams? That whether it's metric or like Celsius or Fahrenheit. But there's a very long section on that and the reason is, because God says you're supposed to be a holy people, and a holy people do not cheat people in business. And the other part that's in that is in this section is on the part for the elderly, besides mipnei seva takum, is al tashlicheni le'etzikna, do not cast someone out in their old age. And there's a very long question there on what's meant by somebody who's old.
back then, maybe 40.
No,
No, they live
I
long
think
lives, actually,
I think in Turkey I voted 70.
70.
So, Rabbi Yossi the Galilean said, by old is meant anybody who's acquired wisdom.
Well, then that's everybody.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, it might be in the middle.
So-
It's everybody.
So then it says here, it means you should not sit in the seat of the old or speak before he is spoken or contradicted. You shall get up, you shall rise. And some people may think that you can just shut your eyes like he's not there and then you won't see him. And that's what, and so Rabbi Yossi the Galilean says, this is in Talmud Kedushin. It says on it, Ani Adonai, why are you supposed to do it? Because God said so. This is something that's entrusted to your heart. So that's like all, if you get on the train or you get on the subway, or get on the bus or waiting in the airport and somebody doesn't have a seat. You shouldn't close your eyes and pretend you didn't see them so that you can sit down. It's, you should know that you should give a seat to somebody. You should get up for someone. But I love that this is not by age. So you have to assume that anybody who's elderly has wisdom, whether you
Except
think they do or
sometimes
not.
the question, some people are actually insulted because you're inferring that they're old, especially if you have gray hair. People think you're old
Smart.
and give you discounts. I'm not trying, this happened to my husband, he wasn't even 60, but his hair was turning gray. And he went on a line in one of the restaurants and they gave him a senior discount. He didn't realize it, I think, until later, but it sort of
Yes, so
hurt him. He
so there's-
talked about it a lot.
there's always that kind of thing around it, but there's a lot on this and what it means to show respect. And one of the questions is, what if somebody, as they get older, also, becomes a little bit foolish and doesn't have the
Yeah.
wisdom that they once had? So one of the questions, the Talmud says you should show respect anyway. You have to figure out a way to deal with someone who I guess we would say the expression is losing it, who used to have wisdom and is not quite there anymore. So that one is interesting. The other one that was here that I wanted to particularly look at is, let's see if I can find it. So we talked about the echoes of the 10 Commandments and the caring for the stranger. Oh, yes. The one that's, if you look on page 3 of the handout, on the one about do not place a stumbling block before the blind. It's in the middle, there's a midrash for that. So the question is, what is it meant by do not place a stumbling block before the blind? Is it only somebody who is physically blind? So this midrash, I think, is really beautiful about this one. Because a person can be blind in their actions. And so if someone asks you, is this man's daughter fit for marriage or fit for the priesthood? Do not tell them she is kosher if she is not. If they ask for advice, do not give them advice that is unfit for them. Do not say leave early in the morning so that robbers may assault them, or say leave in the afternoon so that they fall victim to heat. Do not say to them, sell your field and buy an ass when you have occasion and you can get it from him. So the idea of do not put a stumbling block before the blind is so people can be blind about what they're doing. And if you can save them from something, do that. But if what you're gonna tell them is gonna make things worse, you're putting a stumbling block before them. And until I read this here, it's I'm trying to remember what the Hebrew is for that one. The stumbling block before the blind is it's in number 14. It says lo tikalel cheresh v'lifnei iver lo titein mikshol v'yorata me Elohecha ani Adonai. It's also do not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. Now, why should you not insult the deaf?
Well, the handicap already.
They can't hear the insult.
They can't hear the insult. Right, so you don't,
Oh,
it's
I
the same
see.
thing as you're not, if, even if they can't hear you. Don't insult them. And if you think about, in a certain age bracket, there's many people who are slowly losing their hearing. And, some in Europe, there's a lot of people wearing hearing aids that didn't wear them before. And there's other people who you think need a hearing aid and you don't want to do that. So that, I think, in that case, you mumble to yourself, why, don't they know they need a hearing aid? So when you're doing that, it's lo tikalel cheresh, do not insult the deaf. Sometimes they may not realize they need it, and or they may know they need it, but they maybe they have a type of hearing loss that a hearing aid won't help anyway.
And Sylvia, I think it also means, it's kind of similar to the stumbling block for a blind person. Could be a metaphor where someone just isn't hearing you. How we were
Yeah.
saying, some people are blind to a fact or whatever. They may, metaphorically not hear you.
That's
And also,
beautiful, yes.
a blind person can read lips and also facial expression. So maybe if you were insulting someone down, they might be able to tell by your facial expression.
Right,
Yeah.
but it's very interesting that of the various handicaps that could have been picked to put here, the two chosen are deafness and blindness, because besides being physically deaf and physically blind, you can be metaphorically deaf and metaphorically blind. A person can be metaphorically deaf, they don't want to hear what somebody's going to tell them. So they're deaf to advice, they're deaf to figuring out, if they have a very big problem of advice, they're deaf to advice. And the one about the stumbling block before the blind is maybe, to purposely tell somebody something that doesn't gonna help them no matter what. That's because they're blind, you're making them more blind by doing that. And of course, their examples are from agricultural life. If someone's on a journey and that they go to a certain time of day, there are robbers on that road. If you don't tell them that, you're putting a stumbling block before them as bad as the blind. And it's the same thing, if somebody's moving to a particular city and they go to look for a neighborhood, and they ask you, because you've lived there, is that a good neighborhood for us, and for people who are Jewish to live in? And it is or it isn't. We were just recently with somebody, I'm gonna leave the name out, and we said, oh, your house is so pretty. And they said, if we lived one street over, we'd be in the next suburb and the value of our house would be much higher, but when we bought our house, nobody told us that. So, that's.
But isn't this all part of the moral code of being Jewish and dishonesty? To me, that's the one word that pops out in terms of like talking to someone who's deaf or misleading someone who's blind. To me, that's dishonesty, which is all part of this moral code, which is so important to being honest.
Right, well, that's why this is called the holiness code, because it's all these things. So the very last one I want us to look at, is the one, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. Which is, low, it's the very last one on the sheet. לא תשנא את אחיך בלבבך, הוכח תוכיח את עמיתך, ולא תישא עליו חטא. You shall not, the sages taught in a Braita. It's, so this is in the Babylonian Talmud. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. you shall rebuke your neighbor, but do not bear sin because of them. And so the idea is that, you know, if somebody did something wrong, there's a rebuke, it happens, but if you continue to hate them, it just, you know, people like, they're, it eats, there's that expression, it's eating him up inside. That they can't get over whatever it was that was wrong. And I think that's one of the things here, that don't eat yourself up inside, don't in your heart over something that's happened, or you had to rebuke your neighbor and you had to have a disagreement. The person who will be hurt the most from that is you yourself. Because you're just if you can't get rid of what happened for yourself, it's you who will suffer from it. So I want to summarize what we looked at. So we did a little sample of these ethical commandments that are in the Holiness Code, and which ones are personal, which ones are for business, which ones sound like they're just about physical handicaps, but they're really about their mental attitudes. And this, and really the two, the Ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and this one about do not rebuke your neighbor in your heart, that you want to try to get along with your fellow person. But if you can't, and there's something you have to rebuke about, you can't have it so bother you that you can't continue yourself, that it eats you up inside. And I think that these ethical ones you could spend years on, and there's commentaries on them all over the place. Then you'll see there's some here, I put in some from Rashi and some from Maimonides. And when I went looking for them, I did a very small sample because there were so many of them. It was like, okay, I'll pick these few. And on the sexual ones, I didn't go into them, but I think the most important thing around those is the assumption is that people all have sexual urges. And sometimes those sexual urges can lead to a lot of problems, and especially in the household, because they're people live in very communal settings there, and you're expected to control your urges. You're expected to have the self-control to know who is appropriate to have a relationship with and who is not. Unlike in Egypt, where there was incest practiced between siblings, and where the idea that you could just take a servant and do whatever you wanted with a servant. That's not in a Jewish household or an Israelite household. And these are mostly pointed to the man, but the woman also is involved in these. You don't act on these urges in a way that is improper for the intimate functioning of a communal household. And I think that's a very interesting way to think about them in that sense. And in our world today, where people can live so separately, these things may still go on and nobody knows about them. Somebody wrote a very interesting article on tracing DNA in some families and finding how many improper relationships were found in the family once you did the DNA. And I would hope that if people did DNA on Jewish families, they wouldn't find that in them. Anyway, I hope that gives you a little sense of dipping into the Holiness Code, and you could spend a whole year just studying these. Shabbat shalom.
I want to make an announcement. We're looking for volunteers if you want to help in a cafe. On the occasions when Nina, myself, or Judy are not available to set up, we would need somebody who would be willing to come to Friday morning to set up and then to clean up also. And we can teach you, it just means coming in a little bit later, and then. And then also, if somebody is willing to come perhaps during the week to help set up this little bin, and during the week, me and I are here, if somebody's in the building, we can show you where everything is in the kitchen, just to help set that up, that the person who comes on Saturday isn't spending all that time. Our daughter is expecting to put a child in Cincinnati in a few weeks, and we probably will be gone for a few weeks. Judy may be coming down also, depending upon if it's a class or whatever, we're not sure. So we are looking for people to sort of volunteer, and so we can get together during the week, show people where everything is, explain how things are done. So if you are interested, please let me know. We'll copy the application.
I'll
Thank you.
clear up after.
How long did you go down?